Okay, the game is Shinobi. Your basic fist and stomach, foot and face arcade hit. 19 stages of major ninja warfare.
Shinobi, just one of 70 games from Sega. Games and accessories sold separately. Sega, major fun and games.
The 1980s was the golden age of the arcades, and one of the greatest providers of hardware and software was the one and only Sega. While a lot of your typical arcade cabinets still produced visuals on the level of Donkey Kong and Miss Pac-Man, Sega went full steam ahead and pumped out games like Thunderblade, Outrun, Space Harrier, and of course, Shinobi.
Sega had a very devoted and loyal fan base for these games, so when they jumped into the home console market internationally in 1986 with the release of the Sega Master System, it made sense for them to tap into their existing library of software from the arcade. The Master System received tons of arcade ports, and today we'll be sharing our thoughts on Sega's attempt to bring Shinobi into your living room.
In Shinobi, the player controls a modern-day ninja named Joe Musashi, who has to stop a terrorist organization named Zed that are kidnapping the students of his clan. Joe must rescue the students from their evil captors and terminate the masked ninja that leads Zed from behind the scenes.
After defeating the masked ninja, whose true identity is revealed to be that of Musashi's original mentor Nakahara, it is explained that Zed was formed with the goal of bringing back the feudal era of Japan, in which ninja were at their most active during the constant civil wars that took place.
The version of the game we played for the Sega Master System didn't convey any of that.
No, all you get for a story is you get a picture of the boss you're going to be fighting 5 times.
Yeah, the game does have an interesting, I wouldn't say it's an explanation of its own. You're given a title card that seems to have your target, and it never explains why that's your target, who they are, what they're doing.
Who the kids are.
Who the kids are. It never explains why they kidnapped the kids. I mean, if they're gonna build an army, they've already got an army. You fight the army. Why do they need the kids?
Yeah, an army of, like, actual warriors.
Yeah, it's not even... Is it future-proofing? Are they just gonna...
They're in the academy.
Yeah. So the version of the game we played didn't tell us any of the story. The information we just read from you came from a series of different articles online and the ending of the original arcade version explaining that the masked ninja was Musashi's former master.
So what score would you give the story in light of all that?
It's hard to give that one a score because the version we played didn't really have it.
Yeah.
I mean, the story that does exist in the canon, if you want to call it that, it's not bad. It's basically your typical save the princess from the bad guy. It's just in this case, it's kids.
It's a 1980s video game story.
Yeah, I don't know. I might give it a C.
That's what I'm feeling too. It, like, you know, it's nothing special, but it basically does the job.
Moving on to gameplay.
At its core, Shinobi is a pretty good action platformer. The controls, you know, mostly feel tight, and you know, it works. Probably the biggest problem I found with it was the console version really suffers from some of the design tricks that arcade games of the time used. You know, in terms of its level design, you have very little room for error in any of the enemy encounters. So, you know, coming at it from sort of a modern perspective, it is frustrating in that way.
Sometimes stages begin with enemies just spawning right next to you, which most of the time results in you just being unfairly struck and puts you at an immediate disadvantage trying to move forward in the level. Other times enemies just show up and leave. They don't even attack you. Sometimes they go flying across the top of the screen, and I don't know if it's a glitch in the game or if it's just there to make you nervous. I don't know. It's probably there to keep the player on edge, given that the original arcade version, you didn't have any life. You just took one hit and you died. So they probably just threw those enemies in to create some type of movement to make you, oh god, what do I do? Other times enemies come flying at you in a perfect arc, and there's nothing you can do about it. You have to just already know that enemy is coming and be able to react quickly enough to kill it. In some cases, it just purely relies on you knowing that enemy is there, which a lot of these older games suffered from that problem because the intention was that you'd replay the game multiple times and get really good at it. But being it's an arcade game, the difficulty level is so high that it's clearly designed to just keep taking quarter after quarter after quarter from you, and that doesn't translate well to a console port. One thing I noticed when I was playing through the game is it's difficult to customize Joe to your personal preference. And what I mean by that is the kids, by rescuing them, they act as health upgrades, general power-ups, different weapons. That's what rescuing them provides for Joe. But the kids do not actually visually represent what they're going to give you. Sometimes you're about to die, and you've got a choice between saving one kid or the other kid, and you can only save one. One of them could be giving you health. The other one could be giving you points. And there's no way to know. If you have a melee weapon that you really like and you're really good with, you could rescue a kid and have them give you a new melee weapon that takes yours away. If the kids were color-coded to a green kid gives you life, a yellow kid gives you a power-up, that sort of thing, you could tell the difference between a kid that gives you a melee weapon and a ranged weapon, and you could keep Joe or upgrade Joe as you saw fit. But as it currently stands in this version of the game, you have to rescue all the kids to essentially make sure you're not too weak to progress, but you could also be taking away something about Joe that you like.
Yeah, and those all may seem like fairly small things, but they do contribute to feeling like they sort of take away a bit of control from you, which does hurt the feel of the game, in spite of the tight actual controls. But even those have a bit of an issue, just because of the buttons at your disposal. You know, you only have, I don't remember if it's A and B on the Master System.
I think it's 1 and 2. I don't remember.
So yeah, anyway, you only have 2 action buttons, which you have to use for jumps, long-range attacks, melee attacks, and ninja magic. This has helped a little bit in the arcade game, which had a separate button for your ninja magic, but even just simple attacks, it can be tough to figure out if you're close enough to be doing a melee attack, or if it's going to default you to a long-range attack, which does affect strategy, and again, sort of takes away a bit of a feeling of control.
Having issues with the controls in regards to like knowing what Joe's actually going to do, it does definitely affect how you can play the game, and that translates into the boss fights themselves throughout the game. A lot of the bosses lack feedback. One boss in particular, called Mendara, should have been redesigned from the ground up to better suit and perform on a home console setting. The first stage of his fight is literally you standing in one place, mashing the attack button, throwing shurikens until you've taken them all out. And if your rhythm is off by even 1 second, you will not kill the last Mendara on screen. Is that really what you'd call it? The last Mendara? The last representation of Mendara on screen before he collides with Joe, pushing you into a wall of electricity and killing you. The second phase of that fight is just fine. It's your typical 8-bit boss fight. Jump to evade an attack and then counterattack. Other bosses, like Black Turtle, don't really provide any feedback, at least to me, about whether or not you're doing the thing you should. I think what you're supposed to do is kill all the enemies on screen and make sure you're still attacking the helicopter directly, but I never actually knew if that's what you should be doing definitively, and then I just sort of won. I didn't even realize I was actually doing damage to the boss, and then all of a sudden the boss was dead. I think the first boss of the game, Ken-O, is probably the best designed one.
Yeah, like that's one of the few where you actually have to like really maneuver around, and it feels, you know, somewhat fair.
Yeah, you have to manipulate how he's attacking you, because he'll throw fire at you, and he'll throw fire targeted to where you were standing at the time, so you've got to kind of bait him to throwing the fire in a position where you can then manipulate it to get around it and attack him. That's a well-designed boss. Lobster was another boss that was just bizarrely easy. You bait him to attack, but he's really easy to dodge, and then just beat him in the face. The Masked Ninja, very unforgiving, and how to approach that fight wasn't intuitive. I didn't realize this the first time we played, but a lot of his abilities are actually the same as the different types of ninja magic that we have access to.
Oh, that'd be really cool if it hadn't been ridiculously convoluted to pull off any ninja magic and we'd seen it for ourselves.
Yeah, I think that boss depends on you knowing, oh, he's using this ninja magic, this is how I counter it, because you as the player would know how the enemies countered you. I think that was the design choice there, but the game never once conveyed how to actually use the ninja magic with a 2-button controller, so Rob and I basically never used it at all. I used it once in a personal playthrough, and I didn't really see the benefit to it. So how to approach the Masked Ninja specifically frustrated us to no end at first. Once we finally figured out, let's go back, get some power-ups, and come at him at full strength, He was really easy. We beat him in like seconds.
With like no strategy at all.
Yeah, we just kept wailing on him. Like, I just kept taking hits and kept hitting him, but I had enough health that I could survive through that, and I came out on top. So in my opinion, even though maybe there was some really good design at its core, that boss is really not very well designed as well. It's kind of a disappointment. You're either at a huge disadvantage or it's too easy. He's not balanced well.
Now, it sounds like we're being a little overly negative, but there were definitely some parts of this game that we really liked. I thought the fact that there were multiple layers in a few of the stages was actually really creative. Added, a bit of depth to combat and to sort of strategizing, how am I going to get around this obstacle? How am I going to get behind this guy for a better position? That was something I really wasn't expecting from a game of this era, and it was a really nice, pleasant surprise.
It feels like kind of a weird comparison, but to me it almost feels like how stealth gameplay that you'd see in like a modern day AAA like Assassin's Creed or something. It feels like the 8-bit version of that, where you can reposition yourself to approach an enemy the way you want, and that's not something a lot of these 8-bit platformers, I think, even dared to try.
Yeah, it's not something I think most of them were even thinking about at the time. A lot of those games, it was just, okay, we'll go left to right, and then that's the only environment you have to accomplish your goals in.
The game also has a decent variation of enemies, and it frequently throws new enemies or enemy combinations at you. Punks, mercenaries, various kinds of ninjas, and Mongolian swordsmen. I don't actually know if that's what any of these enemies are, because again, the game never told us that, and I had to look it up on the Shinobi wiki. But just when you finally get used to one enemy type and they become fairly simple to defeat on their own, they start throwing them at you in different combinations that you wouldn't expect. It keeps the gameplay fresh and challenging in a mostly fair way. Sometimes an enemy is positioned right on a ledge and you can't get to them without pixel-perfect platforming and immediately attacking them before they even have a second to attack you. Sometimes the game has those very unfair situations, again with pixel-perfect platforming and enemies being able to knock you into a bottomless pit that just kills you. Sometimes the gameplay feels a little unfair, but again, it's based on that arcade version, which was designed to milk as many quarters out of mommy's purse as it possibly could. I personally feel there is a lot of great things this game does, but it is weighed down heavily by having that 2-button control scheme and being designed for the arcades. It creates an unfair difficulty level that a lot of modern gamers are really going to struggle with. I did personally, despite some of my favorite games being from this era. To me, that warrants a C+.
I was a little more lenient here. I definitely had a lot of those same frustrations, but I think the core of the gameplay is solid enough. I think it deserves a little better score than that. I gave it a B.
The sound is good because it sounds like good sound.
Moving on to the audio, I was actually pretty impressed with this game. The sound effects are all, very crisp and clear. They don't really do anything all that different or unique, but they're just sort of satisfying in that old school arcade way. They make the game just feel more responsive. You get that nice little crunch when you hit a guy. You get, a little sort of ting to let you know that you're not doing any damage to a boss. It was just kind of nice to hear.
The actual soundtrack of the game is fine. It's basic, it's repetitive, but it isn't annoying. I think there's only 3 different songs throughout the entire game. A standard stage song as you're making your way through the different levels, a standard boss fight song, and I think when you completed the stage, there was also a unique dun 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 dun, whatever, you've accomplished the thing sound. But fundamentally, there's not really any songs you're going to take away from this and really remember. A lot of the most iconic music in gaming started in this era. Think about the Super Mario Bros. Theme song, the Legend of Zelda theme song. Those soundtracks all came from the same era, but there isn't any toe-tapping hits from Shinobi that you're really going to remember.
No, there isn't a single song in this game that I can actually remember the tune of right now.
For that reason, I really feel that the sound effects the game has really carry the overall sound design of the game, but the music, the soundtrack, really does not pick up the slack. For that reason, I'm going to give the audio category a C.
Because I liked the sound effects so much, I'm gonna give it a C+.
Oh, just try to fucking outdo me every turn, eh?
We'll see who gets an apple on their desk from Shinobi.
Joe. Oh, I was about to say Joe Sega. But his name really is Joe. Let's talk eye candy, Rob.
Num num.
The game has a simple yet pleasant art style. It makes really good use of the limited color palette available to the Master System. It has a very clear difference between foreground and background, and the mission screen gives a very clear indication of your location relative to the target boss. That was something I noticed when we were playing it that I really, really liked. You had a really good sense of where you are in this world and where you're going, and not a lot of 8-bit games succeeded in doing that in this way.
I thought the pixel art overall was actually really well done, in a way that a lot of games of this era just really weren't. There's some nice detail even on just the regular enemies in the levels, but especially, you know, once you get into the character portraits at the beginning of the stages, or the bonus stages where you can see these big detailed sprites of ninjas. It looks really well. Like, they clearly put a lot of care into this. That said, there aren't really any crazy special effects going on. It is, you know, just kind of workmanlike. I don't know, for visuals, I'd say I'm feeling a C. How about you?
I liked them a lot. I'm a sucker for the 8-bit and 16-bit era's visuals. I just really like pixels. I don't know why. I like little squares that make images of things that aren't squares. So I'm gonna give it a B. So Rob, how does Shinobi appeal to you on a personal level?
Well, he was very nice. He paid for my meal. Like I said in the beginning, it's well done for what it is, but what it is doesn't necessarily appeal to me all that much. You know, I don't play a whole lot of action platformers, and the ones that I do tend to have something that really sets them apart. This, you know, it's a well done action platformer, but that's not necessarily my thing. Especially when it gets as difficult as it does in some parts. Oh my god, why can't I do this? I graduated university, Jesus Christ! Yeah, it just left me kind of frustrated in spots, so I don't know that I'd really go back to it all that often. How about you?
I differ from you in that one aspect that I really like action platformers. It's just a type of game that's always appealed to me. I don't really know why. That being said, Shinobi does have a lot of problems that I can't, in good conscience, forgive it for. As we addressed earlier, the sort of underlying core gameplay is good, but it suffers from being a product of its time that was originally developed for the arcades. It doesn't translate well to a home console game, in my personal opinion. Any appeal that comes to me personally for replaying the game in the future comes from me wanting to try out the different versions of the game that exist, especially the inevitable Switch release for the Sega Ages line. That's definitely a version I'd want to pick up and try again to see if I like it better and see if I could tweak difficulty and other aspects of the game to really cater more to what I want out of the experience. That being said, we played the Master System version, and it has problems that I can't overlook in good conscience. To me, it's not perfect, but it's not the worst. A B. I don't know where to go with that.
I gave it a C. It's not really the kind of thing that appeals to me, but I don't want to penalize it too heavily for that. So for your final grade, what have you got?
Given everything we've said in this review, I personally feel a fair grade to give the overall experience of Shinobi is a B-. It isn't perfect, but it's still pretty good.
And I was pretty close. I gave it a C+, for basically the same reasons.
Who's gonna get an apple on their desk now?
Oh.
Well, that was our review of Shinobi. If you guys just stumbled upon this video and decided to give it a watch, I really recommend you go back and watch our actual playthrough of the game on this channel. It's only 6 episodes long, and we're not very good, but it's only 6 episodes, so go watch it. And if you want to watch Rob and I critique another video game, a couple years ago we released a review of Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. You can knock the dust off that one and pull it off the shelf. You can go have a look there. Anything else you want to say, Rob?
Ladies and gentlemen, guest star Sean Connery. I love this game. It's like they adapted my life and put it in the arcade.